Yo, champion making. So, these are my timely thoughts on Immortals Fenyx Rising, a game released in late 2020 by everybody's favourite publisher with absolutely no negative PR, Ubisoft. This is quite an interesting playthrough for me as I've pretty much avoided AAA releases since the middle of the 7th console generation, with the only contemporary releases I play generally being first-party Nintendo titles. I stopped because gaming was already getting pretty cynical in the 7th gen. We were already well into day one DLC and season passes, and it was pretty clear which way the wind was blowing. Now, just as an aside, Nintendo aren't perfect in this regard either. They do plenty of weird, anti-consumer stuff, but, well, like I said, it's not cynical, or it doesn't feel cynical, because it's kind of just Nintendo doing its own thing. They're not just hopping on bandwagons, mirroring marketing trends, and complaining to the consumer that loot boxes and microtransactions have to be there. I mean, Nintendo pretty thoroughly and consistently proved the opposite. Anyways, I'm gonna pull back from that tangent, although comparisons with Nintendo are going to be unavoidable given that Fenyx Rising is often considered a Breath of the Wild clone. And with good reason, with so much of the game loop being based on managing a stamina bar to climb mountains and glide around. But it does these things worse. I don't have anything but anecdotal evidence to support this, but the game feel is just poor. Fenyx is constantly clipping onto any wall, there's no weight to Fenyx's attacks as they acrobat around the screen, and the whole game is incredibly unbalanced. Phosphor is a perfect example of this. Pretty early on we get a pet bird whose attacks stun-lock the enemy with approximately a second's cooldown. Already way too deadly a tool. But we can also equip this bird with a bunch of additional effects like a substantial HP regen. This customization is true of all your other gear, by the way. And making a loadout can be fun, but it's in tweaking small effects for a big payoff, not combining massive ones to be invincible. But to return to the bird, Phosphor can also unlock two skills, one which makes you invisible to guarantee a devastating first strike. This is also abusable, but I'll skip how. And the ability to make a stone clone of yourself, with which you can now abuse tons of puzzles in the game. Now, I probably consider myself more of a gameplay purist, so that last point really hits home for me. But these are video games, and there's a whole range of visual and audio components that other people value in their considerations. The thing is, these are equally as bad. The graphics are passable, but nowhere near what I would expect from a modern AAA title. The animations are a little better than PS2 era, and there were in-game cutscenes that I wish I'd been quick enough to capture because they really looked like Baba's first polygons. Maybe that's because I'm playing on the Switch port. I don't know, and I don't think so, because I've still seen gorgeous games on the Switch. Either way, the writing isn't hardware dependent, and it is god-awful. The same couple of adolescent stoner and sex jokes over and over and over again. I genuinely cringed a couple of times. And it's so weird, because I'd kind of be willing to give the graphics a free pass because they're bright and colourful and simple, so, well, maybe it's a game for a younger audience. But then the jokes are so prevalent and so thinly veiled, it's like being hit on the head every few minutes with a mallet with "Do you get it?" written on the side. The voice acting is also terrible. It's better than the voice acting in Breath of the Wild, but if it had no voice acting it would have won that point by default. I guess that's a good segue to get into where the game did get stuff right. The vaults are basically shrines from Breath of the Wild, but they're much longer by comparison. Breath of the Wild's loudest criticism by far is also absent. There's no weapon degradation. And if I'm honest, I had a pretty enjoyable time in Fenyx playing it casually, knocking off objectives with YouTube going on the side. Now, that might just be something for me. Like I said, I haven't played many recent releases, so I don't have open world fatigue. But if you do like open worlds, hey, maybe you'll like this one. The side content is more varied and more rewarding than picking up 900 Korok poops, and there is a lot of side content here. I sunk about 40 hours into the playthrough, and I did, at best, 2/3 of the side content, although it is kind of hard to be sure exactly how much there is. And the game is dirt cheap. It retails at around $35, it's always on sale, and obviously secondhand is always up. But the reason why I decided to actually make a video on this game and not others is the experience I had outside of the game. So, my literal first experience is looking at the box, and it's fine. I don't particularly like the artwork itself, but I like the composition of the image. Who knows? Maybe this game will surprise me. And then I guess my second experience is opening the box and being greeted by an insert trying to sell me 3 whole DLC before I've even put the cartridge in. And this is something that's going to keep happening throughout my playthrough. I mean, it's literally going to sell me DLC as soon as I start the game from the title screen. But more on that in a second. So I put the cart in, wait for the update, and then when I boot the game, I'm forced into a Ubisoft sign-up page that I couldn't skip. Now, maybe I could have got around this if I booted in flight mode. I didn't think to test it until afterwards. But what if I couldn't have? What if Ubisoft wouldn't let me play this game without signing up for an account? That's pretty BS. If someone does know a way around this, please post it below and I'll figure out how to pin it so I'm not spreading fake news.
But it's got ticks after everything.
But either way, most people are just going to go along with this needless step. Ubisoft's already taken your money, right? After handing over your data to a large yet nonetheless sketchy company, it rationalizes this forceful action by reassuring you of the handful of trivial features that you didn't ask for that you now have access to. Yippee. In the following week, I believe I received 2 separate emails tracking my in-game progress and pushing the DLC on me. I'm sure I'll get at least one more acknowledging that I've beaten the game, but don't worry, I can always buy more content as if it wasn't bad enough that the ending screen also did the exact same thing. Now, from what I've heard, the DLC is actually pretty substantial, but to me that's almost worse, because I'm sure Ubisoft will make the usual argument that it's not good content and that the price tag reflects additional development costs, but I don't buy it, because it's 3 whole DLC released in 4 months. This content was definitely planned and worked on in the initial development cycle. By comparison, Breath of the Wild was pushed back I think 5 separate times. Not going to fact check, but a long time regardless, to make sure that everything they wanted was in there and included in the original price tag. And yeah, Breath of the Wild does have DLC, but it's like 20 shrines and a transport option. Its small scale is basically evidence of it being developed in post. There are also 2 different store pages within Fenyx Rising. One is to validate the Ubisoft Connect account you just made, and this is basically an achievement system where you get 10, I don't know, Ubi-bucks every time you level up. This is always available from the pause menu, but in case you ever forget about it, you'll get an ugly grey box taking up about a third of the screen every now and then to let you know you've unlocked more Ubi-bucks. The page from the other, well, pause menu, the one where you access your map and equipment. Hit down on the D-pad here and you'll be greeted front and centre with a rare opportunity to buy DLC for this game. And all these storefronts are so superfluous. If you actually wanted the DLC, it's available from the eShop for purchase. It'll be available from the Xbox and PlayStation storefronts as well. But in their eyes, the more entryways there are, then the greater chances of funneling a puncher in. The whole thing is just an artless mess of redundancies. It even has a section on this second store that literally duplicates the Ubisoft Connect store, with the option to buy more Ubi-bucks of course. The bulk of the microtransactions in the storefronts are just for cosmetic items, and I'm not going to reiterate that whole argument here, but even if we take the optimistic viewpoint that that alone is harmless, then Ubisoft still definitely flirts with charging for things that impact gameplay. There's a quest that has to be purchased, there's potion packs, and the cosmetic steed that I bought was objectively better than the ones in-game, as it had 3 times the stamina. Good as well that Hermes and NPC has its own in-game store where the player can do a handful of quests a week and earn an in-game currency and slowly unlock the cosmetics that way. So the player doesn't have to drop more money in the game for that stuff at least, but for me that's an argument that since the content can be purchased that way and should be purchased that way, if it must be purchased at all, then all the more reason for the paid storefront not to exist.
So look, I don't want this to become a channel where I just make hit pieces on your favorite media. There's plenty of that content out there. You can find it if you're looking for it. You know, negativity, it generates interest, either from people being validated in their opinions or people getting offended from them, getting triggered. So I try to be pretty balanced on the game itself, and like said, while there's plenty that's not great about the game, I had a fun enough time playing it in a distracted sort of way. And the real point of the video was never to talk about the game itself. That was necessary, but it was to talk about all the external stuff tacked on by AAA publishers that are ultimately detrimental to the experience. Now, let's be fair here. Is any of this unique to Ubisoft? No, of course it isn't. But they are very willing participants in it. And I think it says a lot when we get one of the most artistic games that have been released this generation, and certainly in a very long time, in Breath of the Wild. And what Ubisoft did as possibly the most experienced open world studio out there was to rush out a minimum viable product to exploit that. I'm drinking mead. JK, it's urine.